Speak again the ancient oaths. Life before death, strength before weakness, journey before destination. Hello and welcome to Speak the Words, the Stormlight Archive podcast. I'm Shawn.
And I'm Mango.
And this is a podcast where I am explaining the story of the Stormlight Archive to Mango 40 minutes at a time. Now, I had said that there wasn't going to be an episode this week. I said that because I didn't have notes, and I didn't think I would have enough notes for us to record early. I just barely got enough notes for us to record early. So it worked out. We're going to put this episode up before I leave, before I go out of town. So, yay for that. Mango.
Yes.
What do you remember from what happened last time?
I remember that, Shallan met with the princess and was trying to become her ward and was trying to, prove herself, but the princess just had really unreasonably high standards and rejected her. And there was also this whole thing with I forgot what it's called, but it's like the little bracelet that can just change things into other things.
Yes, a soul caster.
The soul caster. And they turned a rock or like a stone wall into smoke, and it was all Full Metal Alchemist-y. And then from Kaladin, he got to the war camp and was being really sassy, so they made him go with the bridge crews, and they start going towards battle, and it hasn't gotten that ugly yet, which is hard to believe because it sounds like torture. But I'm assuming it's probably about to get pretty ugly.
Yes, the last thing that happened was the bridge crew charged towards the Parshendi. Yes, that is all. I don't think there's really anything else I can think of to go back to. I should start mentioning this at the beginning of episodes as well, but we're on Twitter at SpeakStormlight if you want to get in touch with us for any reason. I run the Twitter account, so you won't really get in touch with Mango, but I can pass it on. That being said, I'm going to get my timer up because I forgot to do that. As you can tell, I'm very prepared tonight. And I have 40 minutes starting in 3, 2, 1, now. So the bridge crews charged towards the Parshendi, and as they ran, the archers released their arrows. The first wave killed Kaladin's friend, dropping him with 3 separate arrows. The man to his left fell as well. Kaladin hadn't even seen his face. That man cried out as he dropped, not dead immediately, but the bridge crew trampled him. The bridge got noticeably heavier as men died. The Parshendi fire another volley, targeting a specific bridge to the side of Kaladin, and that bridge falters and then falls as the carriers died. Arrows zipped past Kaladin, killing the other 2 men in the front row. Several other arrows smacked into the wood around him, one slicing open the skin of his cheek. The bridge crews were like hogs running to the slaughter. The Parshendi took out another bridge, the Alethi side started firing back. Another bridge dropped, and Kaladin's bridge approached the edge. They dropped it and started to push it across the chasm, the Parshendi firing another volley of arrows. Fiercepren sprang up through the wood, and the bridge grew harder to push as men died around him. Kaladin fell to his knees, leaning over the chasm. He barely managed to catch himself. He'd always loved climbing high rock formations with Tien. He shoved himself backwards away from the edge, and soldiers with shields pushed the bridge the rest of the way. 4 bridges had fallen, but 16 had been placed in a row, allowing for a charge. Kaladin tried to crawl away, but couldn't. He collapsed. I should go, he thought in exhaustion. See if that man is still alive. Bind his wounds. Save him. But he couldn't. Couldn't move, couldn't think. To his shame, he just let himself close his eyes and give himself over to unconsciousness. A feminine voice called out to Kaladin. Kaladin, they're going to leave you. Get up. You'll die. He thought, I can't go back. Let me go." Kaladin felt something sting his face. He tried to open his eyes, one refused, blood from a cut on his cheek having run down and crusted around the eyelid. Hours had passed. The ground near him was littered with bodies. A pair of bridgemen were checking the bodies for life, then pulling the vests and sandals off the dead ones. Kaladin didn't have anything to take, so they wouldn't have checked on him. They would have left him. Kaladin's windspren flew above him, moving anxiously. He asked her if she had a name. He looked around and noticed Sadeas's army had won. They were looking through the Parshendi corpses for something. The plateau they'd charged had some kind of large chrysalis at the center of it, a good 20 feet tall. One side had been hacked open. The windspren said that she does have a name. She wonders why she has a name. Kaladin asks how he should know and rises to his feet. The other bridgeman looked surprised, but he ignored them. He limped over to the corpse of the man he'd befriended. He took the man's clothing, feeling disgusted with himself. The windspren then spoke her name, Silfrena. Kaladin repeated it back to her, and she said, "Sil. That's amusing. It appears that I have a nickname." "Congratulations." Kaladin stood up again, wobbling. Gaz approached Kaladin and pointed at the bridge. He told him to carry it back or get left behind. Kaladin was supposed to have died at the front. That's why he hadn't been given shoes or a vest. He was the only one from the front who had lived. Kaladin nearly sat down and let them leave him. But dying of thirst on a lonely plateau was not the way he'd choose to go. He stumbled over to the bridge. One of the other bridgemen told him they'd get to go slow this time, and that a few soldiers would help. Kaladin walked, feeling numb. He'd thought that there was nothing more life could do to him. Nothing worse than the slave's brand with a shash. Nothing worse than losing all he had to war. Nothing more terrible than failing those he'd sworn to protect. It appeared that he'd been wrong. There had been something more that they could do to him. One final torment the world had reserved just for Kaladin, and it was called Bridge 4. And that is chapter 6.
Huh.
Not great times, but her name is Sil. The windspren's name is Sil, and that's fun.
Pretty name, Silfrena.
Silfrena. Chapter 7, Anything Reasonable, and it's another Shallan chapter. The epigraph for this chapter is, "They are a flame, they burn. They bring the darkness when they come, and so all you can see is that their skin is a flame. Burn, burn, burn." Collected on Pali Shiv, 1172, 21 seconds pre-death. Subject was a baker's apprentice. Shallan chased after Jasnah. As she ran, a small group of Parshmen arrived to clean up the smoke from Jasnah's soul casting. Parshmen could speak, but they rarely did. House Devar had prospered over the last few years because of the discovery of marble deposits on Devar lands. Every time the family had mined all the marble, Shallan's father went out and found another. Later, Shallan and her brothers had found out that her father had been using his forbidden soulcaster to create new deposits of marble. Nobody knew where he'd gotten the fabrial. She now carried it in her safe pouch. It was unusable, damaged on the same night that her father had died. She forced herself not to think about it. They'd repaired the broken soulcaster, but their house steward, Luesh, who had been trained to use the device, could not make it work. They had a year before people would realize that their father was dead. Her brothers had been writing letters in her father's name and spread rumors that Bright Lord Devar was planning something to buy Shallan time. Shallan was to replace Jasnah's soulcaster with their non-functioning one. Shallan didn't know how to escape with the fabrial, but was more focused on getting the device first. That required getting Jasnah to accept her as a ward. Shallan signaled for a master servant and asked one to lead her to the Pallanium, where Jasnah had gone. She entered a room named the Veil. The walls of the cavern reached so high that she couldn't see the top. She's told that the Veil and the Pallanium rooms were here before the city was founded. Some believed that the Dawn Singers carved them. The room was lined with private boxes on the sides of the wall like a theater. A servant tells her that the Pallanium is in the next room. She tries to enter it, but the servant requires an admittance fee, 1,000 sapphire bromes, which is a lot. The servant tells her that the king's hospitals require lots of upkeep, and the Pallanium is the only thing Kharbranth has that's unique to offer. It has the finest collection of tomes and scrolls on Roshar, over 700,000 texts. Shallan wanted to just explore every corner of the Pallanium. She asks the servant where she can wait and if he directs her to one of the private boxes, then goes to find out if Jasnah already has a box. Shallan considered trying to sneak into the Pallanium, but doesn't attempt it. Shallan considered her task of having to convince Jasnah to take her on. She hated confrontation. She was the only daughter, the last memory of Bright Lord Devar's beloved wife. She remembered the incident. Memories attacked her. Non-Balat bruised, his coat torn. A long silvery sword in her hand, sharp enough to cut stones as if they were water. Shallan pushed the memories away. The servant returned and led her to Jasnah's box. They went up on a platform that was raised by parchment with ropes and a pulley. They stopped about 40 feet above the ground, and the servant led her the rest of the way to Jasnah's box, then left. Shallan sat in a chair and started going through her notebook filled with sketches. She started to draw Kharbranth. She's crazy talented. She must have a photographic memory or something, but she works on autopilot. Adding more and more detail to the drawing, she enters a trance as she drew. So, before too long, she had copied her memory onto the page. And I will say that in the book, the word memory is capitalized. So, that's a thing. I would say it's like referring to a photographic memory, and that's why it's capitalized. But the fact that it's capitalized is important because you don't just capitalize words randomly.
I mean, some people do.
Some people do. You shouldn't, though. Shallan held up the sheet, satisfied, relaxed, her mind clear. The memorized image of Kharbranth was gone from her head. She'd released it into her sketch. She then started drawing Yalb, the servant, or the sailor that had helped her get to the conclave. When she collected a memory of a person, capital M, she was snipping free a bud of their soul, and she cultivated and grew it on the page. Creation Spren gathered around her pad. Like other Spren, they were said to always be around, but usually invisible. Sometimes you attracted them, sometimes you didn't. It depended on skill. She drew 6 of them with her drawing them with her act of creation just as a bright fire would draw a flame Spren. She finished drawing Yalb. Shallan collected people and interesting creatures. Through her art, she'd gotten into the habit of memorizing... Yeah, that's a sentence, isn't it? Through her art, she'd gotten into the habit of memorizing people to draw later when her father had caught her drawing Dark Eyes and gotten mad. Shallan took out another piece of paper, and the creation Spren watched in anticipation as she started to draw Jasnah. She drew the moment where Jasnah had soul cast the stone. She'd held the power of change itself, the power with which the Almighty had created Roshar. The Ardents called him, I'm gonna try, Elithanathil, something like that. He who transforms. Shallan finished her drawing, a masterpiece. She'd done something the Ardents had never managed. She'd captured Jasnah Kholin. Shallan pulled out another piece of paper and started writing a letter to Jasnah to prove her worth. Shallan had heard of logic Spren who were attracted to great arguments, but Shallan had never seen them herself. She essentially says in the letter that all her tutors had left because of her father's temper and Shallan had to teach herself. She argues that since she worked hard to get where she is, she'd appreciate the wordship more. As she examined her letter, she got self-conscious. Someone entered. A man in his early 20s, not late 20s, a man in his early 20s wearing simple gray robes, an Ardent. The man apologized for intruding and asks if she's also waiting for Jasnah. He asks if he can wait with her, and she notes that he has a faint Herdazian accent. The man went to get another seat and then came back. Shallan found him handsome. Her father had owned 3 Ardents, all elderly men. The Ardent regarded the 3 drawings Shallan had done, impressed. He tells her that his name is Capsule. Capsule pokes fun at how respectful Shallan is being, and she says that she was raised to be respectful to Ardents. She says that to show Ardents a lack of respect would be to show it to the Almighty. Capsule asked her if this is how she'd react to the Almighty appearing to her, and she says that she'd probably scream with pain as it's written that any who look at the Almighty would burn to ash. Capsule laughed and tried to set her at ease. She's still hesitant with him, though. He asks her if he needs to step up on the desk and dance to get her to relax. She didn't say anything, so he started to climb onto the desk. Shallan stops him, imagining...
I like this guy already.
Yeah. Shallan stops him, imagining the Ardent misstepping and falling off the balcony. She promises not to respect him any longer. He laughs and leans closer to her. The table jig threat almost always works. I've only ever had to go through with it once, due to a lost bet against Brother Lanin. The Master Ardent of our monastery nearly keeled over in shock. He asks her how she'd gotten so skilled at drawing, and she says it was just practice. He says that she must have had someone to teach her, and she names a famous artist. He says, "Ah, a true master of pencils, if there ever was one. Now, not that I doubt your word brightness, but I'm rather intrigued how Dandos Heraldin could have trained you in arts as, last I checked, he's suffering a rather terminal and perpetual ailment, namely that of being dead for 300 years. Shallan blushed. My father had a book of his instruction. You learned this, Cabal said. Capsule said, lifting up her drawing of Jasnah. From a book. She says yes. He looked back at the picture and says, I need to read more. Shallan took a memory of the Ardent as he admired her work. He asks her if she's from Yakaved, and she asks if it was the hair or accent that gave it away. He says that people in Yakaved are overly respectful with Ardents. She says he should have danced on a table. More. I considered it, he said. But my brother and sister Ardents from your country would likely have dropped dead of embarrassment. I would hate to have that on my conscience. The Almighty is not kind towards those who kill his priests. Capsule asks Shallan what Jasnah thinks of her art, and she tells him that Jasnah isn't very appreciative of the visual arts, and Capsule calls that one of her few flaws. Shallan asks her if another one of those flaws is being a heretic, and Capsule asks her how she got involved with Jasnah as she's so devout. Shallan tells him that she's petitioning Jasnah for wardship. Capsule asks Shallan to tell Jasnah that he was looking for her. He's requested an audience with her several times, and he says that she presents a unique challenge, and he wouldn't be able to live with himself if he didn't at least try to convert her. She says that Jasnah will probably refuse, and Capsule says that just means that he'll get to meet with Shallan again, so he looks forward to it. He asks her if there's anything that she's fond of, and she tells him that she likes jam. He nodded, then left. Shallan wondered why he didn't wait for Jasnah to return. A little while later, she heard footsteps outside the room. Jasnah Kholin entered a moment later, accompanied by a small group of servants. She did not look pleased. And that's chapter 7. So Shallan has met a nice ardent friend. Capsule. Chapter 8. Nearer the Flame. Victory. We stand atop the mount. We scatter them before us. Their homes become our dens. Their lands are now our farms. And they shall burn, as we once did, in a place that is hollow and forlorn. Collected on Shawn, 1172, 18 seconds pre-death. Subject was a light-eyed spinster of the 8th dawn. Jasnah was frustrated that Shallan was in her box. She yells at Shallan, telling her that she's wasted enough of her time, and tells her to leave, that she doesn't want to see her again. Shallan gathers her things and apologizes for bothering Jasnah, then leaves. She cries as she hurries away. She reaches the platform to go down to the ground floor, then slides down to the ground. She wraps her arms around her legs. Angry people unsettled her. She thought of her father, his screams. She felt weak for being unsettled by confrontation. She feels foolish for thinking she could do this. Painsbrand gathered around her. She'd wasted 6 months. A servant called out to Shallan, telling her that Brightness Kholin would like to speak with her. Shallan thought she just wanted to yell at Shallan thought that Jasnah just wanted to yell at her more. She followed the servant back to the box. Jasnah was rubbing her forehead with her free hand. The soulcaster rested against the back of her skin, the smokestone dark and cracked. She looked tired. She apologizes to Shallan. You were simply showing persistence, a trait I normally encourage. Storm's a light. I've oft been guilty of stubbornness myself. Sometimes we find it hardest to accept in others that which we cling to in ourselves. My only excuse can be that I have put myself under an unusual amount of strain lately. Jasnah turned to look out into the darkness of the veil. I know what people say of me. I should hope that I am not as harsh as some say, though a woman could have a far worse reputation than one for sternness. It can serve one well. Jasnah gestured to some spheres that Shallan had left behind on accident. Shallan gathered them up and then told Jasnah that Capsule had been looking for her. Shallan asks Jasnah what she thought of the letter that she'd left for her. Jasnah asks which letter, and Shallan points to it on the table. Jasnah reads the letter and asks Shallan if it was true that she was self-taught. She says that it's remarkable. She praises Shallan on the use of a letter to appeal to her. She says that Shallan should have left the note and gone before she returned, and Shallan argues that Jasnah would have missed it if she'd done that. Jasnah acknowledges Shallan's circumstances being different and says that if she can gain sufficient groundwork in history and philosophy, Jasnah would accept her. Jasnah's offer was kind, but it would take years for Shallan to do that. House Devar would fall. Shallan thanked Jasnah, then withdrew. If Shallan had time, Jasnah's offer would have worked, but she didn't. Her and her brothers had found strange maps in their father's study. They didn't know what they were. Helleran, her eldest brother, had known more, but had vanished over a year ago. Thinking of her father made her feel ill. She raised her free hand to her head, suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of House Devar's situation, her part in it, and the secret she now carried, hidden 10 heartbeats away. She exits the conclave and finds Yalb waiting for her, playing cards with some guards. She thought he'd have returned to the ship hours ago. She tells him he didn't need to wait so long, but he says that he won a ton of money off the guards, so it was fine. Yalb departs from his game and escorts Shallan back to the ship. Shallan tells him that he shouldn't gamble, and he says it isn't gambling if you know you're going to win. He's impressed with himself that he had been able to cheat 4 guards at once. Shallan tells Yalb that she'd failed with Jasnah. Yalb thinks it's ridiculous that Shallan wouldn't be good enough for Jasnah. He says that she's perfect. He asks if she's going to give up. Shallan says that she's already tried twice, and Yalb says that in cards, you always gotta play a third hand. Yalb says that according to the passions, you win when you need it most. Shallan thinks of the passions as a pagan superstition. She's worried that if she tried a third time, Shallan would withdraw the offer she'd made for the future. Shallan wouldn't have time to take that offer anyways. Alright. So, this is the first part of the book that I'm majorly gonna skip because it's a side quest that doesn't matter. Essentially, Shallan decides to get a bunch of books on history and philosophy and try to cram really quickly so that she can prove something really quick to Jasnah and get taken on as her ward. I'm going to give some details, but I'm going to skip most of it. Pretty much, Shallan goes to a bookshop that is run by a man and his wife. The man handles the money and the wife handles the actual reading. The man patronizes Shallan, asking if she wanted a nice romance novel or some shit like that, and she asks him for a book on philosophy and logic. One of the sets of books that he presents to her is a set of books on the 5 Vorin kingdoms, and I bring this up because Shallan says that there were only 4 Vorin kingdoms: Yakaved, Alethkar, Kharbranth, and Natanatan. They'd been strong allies following the Recreants, but she didn't know of a 5th kingdom. The bookseller suggests a book by the Shin writer who Jasnah mentioned in the last chapter, and Shallan thought of the Shin as people who lived in mud and worshipped rocks. The man who had killed Jasnah's father nearly 6 years before, prompting the war against the Parshendi and Natanatan, had been Shin, the assassin in white they called him. Zeth.
That was 6 years before?
Yeah, so nearly 6 years before.
Dang.
So we jumped 5 years, and then it's been like 8 months or something since Kaladin was in Amaram's army.
Oh.
Yeah, because the 5-year jump was to the battle with Amaram's army, and then Kaladin has been a slave for 8 months since then. So it's been like 5 years and 8 months or something around there.
Oh, okay.
The books were too expensive, so Yalb runs this big scam where he pretends to be a rival bookseller to get the shopkeeper to sell the books to Shallan for less. Shallan thanks him for helping her and asks if it was obvious that they would have swindled her. He says just a little. She takes out the picture of Yalb she'd drawn and offers it to him in return for his help, and he just absolutely loves it. She took another memory of him and decided to redraw him later. She wanted him in her collection. She mentions
That's interesting. She can,
yeah,
take a photographic memory on demand.
Yes.
That's cool.
It is cool. It's very interesting. Again, capital M.
Yeah.
Nomen, the middle moon, had started to rise. I just wanted to name the other moon because you asked about multiple moons earlier.
Wait, say it again?
It's called Nomen. Nomon.
Nomen.
Yes. I can't remember what all the names are. I'm not going to lie to you. Shallan.
Oh, yeah. I remember. Just, this isn't like a spoiler for the future. Yeah. It's just something I heard Brandon Sanderson apparently does, is he really likes doing palindromes.
Oh, yes. Yes.
His naming conventions, because there's this thing in the universe about symmetry or whatever.
Yes.
But so that just reminded me of that.
That is a palindrome, isn't it?
It is a
I just thought about that. Yeah. In Voran culture, they think of palindromes as being holy. If something is perfectly symmetrical, then it is holy. And yes, I paused my timer for that. I'm going to resume it now.
Okay.
Shallan goes back to the conclave. She rented the box in the Vale next to Jasnah's. She settles down in the Fuck. Okay, hold on. Let me try that again. She settles down in the alcove and started looking through the books. I'm never going to be rid of you, am I? Jasnah asked. Shallan jumped and she turned to see Jasnah in the doorway. Shallan apologizes, not having intended to disturb Jasnah. Jasnah quiets Shallan, and then a parshman carries in a seat for Jasnah to sit in. Jasnah says that she'd bribed the servants to tell her if Shallan returned to the Vale. Shallan began to apologize, and Jasnah told her not to bother. She complimented Shallan on her choice of books. Jasnah guesses Shallan's plan and compliments it. She tells Shallan that she knows why Shallan wants to be her ward so desperately, and Shallan starts to fucking panic.
Oh.
Jasnah points out...
Let me guess, she doesn't actually know.
Well, you see, what Jasnah points out is that Shallan's house has many enemies, and it would be difficult for her to marry well without a sound alliance. And Shallan goes, yeah, that's it. You're right. You figured it out.
Oh, okay, so she didn't figure it out.
No.
Good. Good.
Jasnah took Shallan's satchel and started looking through it. She looks through all her drawings and asks Shallan why she'd done them. Shallan tells her she'd wanted that. She's like, I wanted to draw some stuff. Jasnah tells her to gather her things and go to the rooms that Jasnah had been granted by the king. She says that the notebook proves that Shallan is passionate about scholarship. If I cannot be rid of you, then I might as well make a use of you. Go and sleep. Tomorrow we will begin early, and you will divide your time between your education and helping me with my studies. Jasnah left. It had been a very, very long day, but she'd won. The first step had been completed. Now her real task began. And that is the end of chapter 8. And I'll tell you now, that is the last we're going to see of Shallan for a little bit.
Oh.
That is her last chapter in part 1, and she is not in part 2.
Aw.
Yes. I again forgot to grab the image that pops up here, so I'm going to pause my timer and go grab that. I have an image here for Mango. I'm going to send it to her right now.
Let me open it in my browser so I can actually read it.
Okay. You don't need to read all the words in there. It's like a codex entry, kind of.
A chol. It's like... It's another crustacean, but it has like a really, really tall shell.
Mm-hmm. These are the things that were
pulling... And people seem to be riding it and pulling carts with it.
Yeah, this was the thing that was pulling Kaladin's cart when he was in the slave cart. Yeah, and you also, there's an image on there of what it looks like when they go back into their shell in the top right corner. Very cool. I presume that's another entry in Shallan's journal, like we got with the Sky Eel. I honestly don't remember. Alright, Chapter 9, Damnation. The epigraph reads, 10 people with shard blades alight standing before a wall of black and white and red. Collected on Jesachev, 1173, 12 seconds pre-death. Subject, one of our own Ardents, overheard during his last moments. Bridge 4, we're back to Kaladin. Bridge 4 had an above-average casualty rate of the bridge crews, with the average casualty rate for the bridge crews being about 1/3 to 1/2 of the crew in one run. So, lots of people are dying in Bridge 4. Kaladin had put there on purpose. They were trying to kill him. Kaladin sat against a barrack wall, Syl hovering on his shoulder, his head slumped. He couldn't bring himself to move inside out of the rain. 23 of the 25 men that had survived Kaladin's first bridge run were now dead. Only Kaladin and one other man remained, 2 out of nearly 40. Many had come and died since then. Sometimes it wasn't that bad. If the Alethi arrived before the Parshendi, no bridgeman died. If another High Prince arrived first, Sadius wouldn't help. The Parshendi would Sadius, great guy. Another High Prince gets there first? Fuck it. They got this. The Parshendi would target specific bridges during attacks, and Bridge 4 always seemed to get targeted. Kaladin didn't bother to learn the other men's names. He thought he should learn someone's name so that at least when they both died, they'd have someone to talk to in Damnation. Gaz would set them to work soon, some menial labor to keep their minds busy. Kaladin still wasn't sure why they fought on the plateaus, but it had something to do with the chrysalises with the gemstones in their centers. He wasn't sure what that had to do with the Vengeance Pact, though. The bridgemen weren't allowed to leave the camp. Kaladin asked why, as some bridgemen weren't allowed to run out in front and try to block arrows with shields, and he'd been told it would slow down the bridges, and that if he asked again, he'd be strung up. The Light Eyes acted as if this was all a game. Syl tells Kaladin that he hasn't spoken in days. Kaladin thought about the one way out. There was a chasm that bridgemen could visit near camp. It was forbidden, but the sentries ignored them. It was seen as the one mercy that could be given to bridgemen. Bridgemen who took that path never returned. My father used to say that there were two kinds of people in the world, Kaladin whispered. He said there were those who take lives and there were those who save lives. I used to think he was wrong. I thought there was a third group, people who killed in order to save. I was a fool. There is a third group, a big one, but it isn't what I thought. Syl asks him what the third group was. The people who exist to be saved or to be killed. The group in the middle, the ones who can't do anything but die or be protected. The victims. That's all I am. We exist to be killed, if we're not dead already. Later, Kaladin was dragging logs into the lumber yard. Syl told him that she hated seeing him like this. A voice inside Kaladin spoke about figuring out why the armies didn't work harder to defend the bridges, why the armies don't ever push against the Parshendi. They just fight on the plateaus, then come back to the camps and celebrate. He ignored that voice. You used to be so vibrant, Syl said. So many looked up to you, Kaladin. Your squad of soldiers, the enemies you fought, the other slaves, even some Light Eyes. I used to watch you fight. I can barely remember it. My memories of them are fuzzy. Like looking out at you through a rainstorm. Kaladin thought that was odd. He hadn't noticed Syl until after he'd already left the army, and she'd acted like a normal windspren back then. Kaladin hesitated and was whipped for stopping. He continued working and thought of the punishments bridgemen faced. If you refused to charge the Parshendi or lagged behind the other bridges, you were beheaded. If you did something really bad, they'd string you up for the Stormfather's judgment, leaving you tied to a post or a wall to face a high storm. But you could only be executed for refusing to charge the Parshendi, which, I mean, stringing you up in a high storm is the same thing as executing them, but it's like tying somebody to a rock and being like, you'll be fine if God likes you.
Yeah.
Charging with your bridge might get you killed, but not doing so will definitely get you killed. Larish, the soldier who brought new bridgemen, arrived at the lumber yard and called out to Gaz. The group consisted, he had brought a group with him and, the group of new bridgemen, and the group consisted of slaves, thieves, and other lawbreakers. Sometimes a soldier would be thrown in if they did something extremely bad. Never Parshmen, though. They were too valuable, and it would be dangerous to send Parshmen up against their cousins, the Parshendi. Larish says he had a special group of recruits for Bridge 4. Kaladin looks at them and notices a boy barely 14 or 15. Tien, he whispered, taking a step forward. He stopped, shaking himself. Tien was dead, but this newcomer looked so familiar with those frightened black eyes. It made Kaladin want to shelter the boy, protect him. He'd always failed, though. From Tien to Sen, everyone died. What was the point? Syl told Kaladin that she was going to leave. She was the last thing he had left, and he whispered no to her. She told him that she'll try to come back, but she tells him that she has an instinct that if she leaves, she might lose herself. Kaladin tells her not to leave then. She says that she can't watch this anymore, that she'll try to return, then says goodbye and flies off. Kaladin watches her go, numb. And then he went back to work. The next day, the boy who reminded him of Tien died. Kaladin found the boy's body after the army had charged across the bridge and engaged the Parshendi. Kaladin remembered lying in a hollow, holding a similar corpse. Nearby, the only other survivor of Kaladin's first bridge run also lay dead. That night, Kaladin huddled in the barracks listening to the high storm. I can't keep going like this, he thought. I'm dead inside, as sure as if I'd taken a spear through the neck. The storm continued its tirade, and for the first time in over 8 months, Kaladin found himself crying. Chapter 10, Stories of Surgeons. And this time, Mango, there is no epigraph. Would you like to know why there's no epigraph?
Sure.
There is no epigraph because the first words are 9 years ago. This is our first flashback chapter.
Oh, okay. That's why.
So, it is a Kaladin chapter. It's 9 years prior. Kaladin is 10 years old and he goes by Kal at this point. He stumbles into his father's surgery room apologizing. His father, Liren, was tightening a strap around the arm of a young woman. He told Kal that they'd discuss his tardiness later and to shut the door. Kal walked over to the young woman. Her name was Sani. She was 15 and had a bloody, ragged bandage wrapped around her free hand. The wound wasn't life-threatening. If it had been, then Liren would have started already, using Kal's mother, Hesina, as an assistant. Liren reminded Kal to wash his hands, and Kal asked why it matters. Wisdom of the heralds, Liren said absently, repeating a lecture that he'd given many times before. Deathspren and Rotspren hate water. It will keep them away. Kal says one of the other boys says that's silly. He says Deathspren aren't afraid of a little water. Liren tells him that the heralds were wise beyond their understanding. Kal calls the heralds demons and says an Arden had taught him that. Liren tells him that he's mixing up radiance and heralds. The heralds were sent to teach mankind, Liren said. They led us against the Voidbringers after we were cast from heaven. The Radiants were the orders of knights they founded, who betrayed us once the heralds left. They were not demons, they were just men who had too much power and not enough sense. He brings back around, telling Kal that he must always wash his hands. Kal did as he was told. Kal had heard his father say that he didn't believe the Voidbringers were real. The other townspeople treated Liren differently because of how much time he spent with books and sick people. They treated Kal differently by association. Kal watched as his father removed the bandage, thinking that this would be a good practice for when he went to war someday, to fight for his High Prince and the Light Eyes. Sani had 3 broken fingers. Kal felt them and asked his father if the 3rd finger would have to go. Liren nodded and smiled, happy that Kal had figured it out for himself. Kal's father amputated the finger, and Kal wiped at the blood to help his father. Liren had been able to save 4 of the fingers. That wasn't how Sani's parents would see it, though. They'd be disappointed that their beautiful daughter would have a disfigured hand. Liren said the townspeople had grown accustomed to having a surgeon. It was an expectation now, not a privilege to them. Sani's parents were good people, though. They'd make a donation, and Kal's family, his parents, him, and his younger brother Tien would be able to eat. Kal wrapped on clean bandages, and Liren told him that he needed to work on his nerves. It is good to care, Liren said, but caring, like anything else, can be a problem if it interferes with your ability to perform surgery. Kal couldn't understand how caring too much could be a problem, and thought his father was being too hypocritical, as he was so selfless that he never charged for his work. Kal cleaned the room, and Liren asked why he'd been late. Kal says that Tien and him had been to see what another boy named Jam had learned with his quarterstaff. Kal told his father that Jam's father was a soldier in Bright Lord Amaram's army. Liren said he knew Jam's father and that he'd had to operate on the man's leg 3 times. Kal says that they need soldiers. He asks his father if he'd have their borders violated by the Thalans. Liren corrects Kal, saying that Thalana was an island kingdom that didn't share a border with them. Kal says that they fight someone, and Liren agrees, saying that King Gavilar always finds people for them to fight. He tells Kal that they need surgeons more than soldiers. He says, "Son, you nearly cry each time someone is brought to us. You grind your teeth anxiously during even simple procedures. What makes you think you could actually hurt someone?" Kal says that he'll get stronger, and Liren asks him why he'd want to learn this, and asks who put these ideas in his head. Kal says he wants to learn for honor. Who tells stories about surgeons for Harold's sake? Liren says, the children of the men and women whose lives we save. That's who tells stories of surgeons. Kal blushes and turns back to his cleaning. Liren says, there are 2 kinds of people in this world, son. Those who save lives and those who take lives. And what of those who protect and defend, the ones who save lives by taking lives? Kal asked. His father snorted. That's like trying to stop a storm by blowing harder. Ridiculous. You can't protect by killing. Liren quizzed Cal on the properties of a plant, and Cal instantly recounts them. Liren tells him that he has such a good mind. Liren had been saving up to send Cal to Kharbranth when he turned 16 to train with real surgeons. Cal got excited at the idea of visiting a different kingdom. You have a gift from the heralds themselves, Liren said, resting a hand on Cal's shoulder. You could be 10 times the surgeon I am. Don't dream the small dreams of other men. Our grandfathers bought and worked us to the second non so that we could have full citizenship and the right of travel. Don't waste that on killing. And that is the end of chapter 10. It's a short one.
Well, we know where that goes.
Yeah, he was supposed to go to Kharbranth at 16. But I'm pretty sure they said that he joined the Amram's army at 15. So he does not get there. But we do get the reveal of who Tien is, because I've name dropped Tien about
little brother.
Mango, not just his little brother, his dead little brother.
Yeah, his dead little
brother.
That's sad.
Yeah, we only have one chapter left in the part, so I'm just gonna stop my timer and we'll go through the rest of this.
Okay.
Chapter 11, Droplets. The epigraph for this reads, 3 of 16 ruled, but now the broken one reigns. Collected, Chachanan, 1173, 84 seconds pre-death. Subject, a cut purse with the wasting of sickness, of partial Iriali descent. The night that Syl left, Kaladin left the barracks after the high storm. As he walked outside, Gaz called out to him. Gaz had left out spheres in the high storm to be infused again and was retrieving them. Gaz asked Kaladin what he was doing, saying that if he'd stolen anyone's spheres, then Gaz would have him strung up. Kaladin ignored him and began to walk away. Gaz calls after him again, saying that he'll have him strung up regardless, that Kaladin can't escape. Kaladin interrupts Gaz, saying that he's going to the Honor Chasm. Gaz quieted and watched as Kaladin walked away. Then he called out to Kaladin, telling him to leave his vest and sandals so nobody would have to go down and fetch them. Kaladin pulled off his vest and sandals, then left them behind as he walked away. Kaladin had battle shock, unable to focus on the days between bridge runs. He'd had trouble deciding to go to the chasm, but he couldn't watch another boy die. He walked towards the Honor Chasm and noticed the rope ladders hung nearby. Bridgemen were sent down to salvage from corpses that had fallen into the chasms. Kaladin looked out over the shattered plains. This place wasn't natural. The land had been broken, and now it broke the people who came to it. Kaladin sat down on the edge of the chasm, watching the rain falling into the chasm. You are right, Father, Kaladin whispered. You can't stop a storm by blowing harder. You can't save men by killing others. We should all become surgeons, every last one of us. He felt clarity at the end. He looked back at his life, then climbed to his feet. Feeling his father's disappointment looming over him, he put one foot over the edge. A voice called out to him. Kaladin froze, and Syl flew towards him, carrying something heavy. She'd brought him something. Blackbane. He harshly asked her why she brought it to him. She said that he'd treated the other leaves that he'd lost in the slave carriage so carefully. She thought it would make him happy if she got him more. Kaladin almost laughed. She had no concept of what she'd done, fetching him a leaf of one of Roshar's most deadly natural poisons because she'd wanted to make him happy. It was ridiculous and sweet. Syl said that before he'd lost the leaf, he fought. Everything went wrong after that. Kaladin said that he'd failed. You don't like it then? I flew so far, I almost forgot myself. But I came back. I came back, Kaladin. He asked her why she cared. She said, because I do. I watched you, you know, back in that army. You'd always find the young, untrained men and protect them, even though it put you into danger. I can remember. Just barely, but I do. Kaladin said that he'd failed them. They'd died. She says that they'd have died more quickly without him. Their gratitude for Kaladin is what had drawn her to him in the first place. Kaladin says that everything he touches withers and dies, and he teetered on the ledge. Syl says that he could help the men in the bridge crew. Kaladin says it's too late. They're dead. They're all going to die, and there's no way out. What is one more try then? What could it hurt? Syl asked. You can't fail this time, Kaladin. You've said it. They're all going to die anyway. He thought of Tien and his dead eyes staring upward. One more try, Kaladin. Please. Kaladin thought of the bridgemen, frightened. He felt determination come alight inside of him. He dropped the Blackbane leaf into the chasm. Kaladin turned and walked away from the chasm. He returned to the barracks and found Gaz there. Too cowardly to go through with it, your lordship? Well, if you think I'm giving back... Kaladin cut Gaz off, grabbing him by the throat and throwing him onto the ground. The will just changed, Gaz. I died down in that chasm. Now you've got my vengeful spirit to deal with. We're going to start over new, you and I. Clean. And I want you to understand something from the start. I am already dead. You can't hurt me, understand? Gaz nodded. Bridge 4 is mine, Kaladin said. You can assign us tasks, but I'm bridge leader. The other one died today, so you have to pick a new one anyway. Understand? Gaz nodded again. You learn quickly. Cal let Gaz go, and the other man climbed to his feet. Kaladin told Gaz that he wanted to stop paying down his slave debt. He says that he'll start taking his wages, and Gaz will get 1 in every 5 payments to stay out of Kaladin's way. Gaz agrees, and Kaladin walks back into the bridge for his barrack. He walked up to one of the men and asks his name. The man was older, with brown eyes and short white salted hair. He had a short beard. The man tells him to storm off. Look, friend, you can either tell me your name, or I'll keep pestering you. Continue refusing, and I'll tow you out into the storm and hang you over the chasm by one leg until you tell me, Kaladin said. The man says his name was Teft. Kaladin introduces himself and says he's the new bridge leader. He held out his hand. Teft hesitated, then took Kaladin's hand. Kaladin recognized Teft. He'd been in the crew for a few weeks. He'd been on another crew before, but broke some rule and got transferred to Bridge 4 as punishment. Kaladin released Teft's hand and told him to get some rests. They had a hard day tomorrow. Teft asks how Kaladin knows, and Kaladin says that every day is a hard day for bridgemen. Teft says Kellic knows that's true. Kaladin visited each man in the crew, pushing them until they gave him their names. He got all their names, then sat down, beginning to plan. Syl alighted on his leg as he sat, whispering the names of the men to himself. She looked encouraged, bright, happy. He didn't feel any of that. He felt grim, tired and wet, but he wrapped himself in the responsibility he had taken, the responsibility for these men. He held to it like a climber clung to his last handhold as he dangled from a cliffside. He would find a way to protect them. The end of part 1.
That was okay.
Yeah, that last chapter's a bit of a doozy, huh?
God bless Syl.
Yeah. I do want to touch on some stuff from this. Starting with Shallan. She is now the ward of Jasnah. You met Cabsel.
Yep.
Which you said you like Cabsel.
So far.
I liked Cabsel as well. Shallan's memory is interesting, I think. Frankly, it's still kind of confusing to me. And the reason for that is I read these books after I read Mistborn, so I already had some Cosmere knowledge. Which, for people that don't know, Cosmere is the name of the universe that all these books take place in. And what I will say is that the memory power that she exhibits is similar to something found in Mistborn, which is why I find it so curious. And that is something that I really enjoy about these books, is that reading different series and when you're on different worlds, you still find things that work in similar ways. And that just adds to the mystery of what the fuck is going on in the Cosmere and how everything works. But I think her memory is extremely fascinating. With Kaladin, we got some explanation of who the Radiants are, which I think the only time I mentioned the Radiants once in the prologue, or no, the prelude, is when Jezrien tells Kallik that they have the Radiants and that will be enough. But
and the Radiants betrayed them.
Is what Liren says, yes. That after the Heralds left, the Radiants betrayed mankind. That's
Okay, so were those people the heralds, and then they still had the radiance, but after the heralds left, the radiance betrayed them?
Yes. So the people we saw in the prelude were the
Oh,
heralds.
okay.
They left.
Okay.
And then after they left, at some point, the radiance betrayed mankind. The heralds left the radiance behind to protect mankind. And something happened. We met.
I wonder if it has something to do with the one guy they left behind.
That is a good theory.
We're not going to talk about that.
Well, no, I'm not. That is a good theory, though. With Kaladin, we also met his father, Liren, and we didn't meet his mother, but we got his mother name dropped, Hesina. And Tien. I've name dropped Tien a ton. Like, he gets mentioned so often. Did you ever think that maybe Tien was his brother or something like that?
Honestly, I don't even remember the other times that you mentioned him.
Fair enough. Kaladin talks about he just pretty much any time Kaladin is feeling bad, he remembers Tien.
Oh.
Kaladin was going to go to Kharbranth and become a surgeon. Imagine a world where Kaladin went to Kharbranth to become a surgeon, and maybe he met Shallan when she went looking for Jasnah. That would have been interesting.
I mean, he's gonna meet her eventually anyway.
You would hope so,
and then
right?
we wouldn't have the story that we have now.
Yes, so. Yes. It's interesting. It's interesting to think of how different things could be. I think that's something that he does intentionally. I think he adds that nugget in there so that you have the what if of what if Kaladin had gone to Kharbranth, and what if his life was better and he'd met Shallan and our stories were happening in one place. But I think that just makes it even better when that's ripped away from you, because he's not there. He's in a slave camp he's a slave in a war camp. But after this one, do you see maybe a little bit more why I like Jasnah with how she acts? Because she is kind of a bitch in the last episode, but I think she comes across a little more even in this one.
She shows up for 10 seconds in this one.
Yeah, but look, you gotta take it where you can get it, Mango, okay?
I was like, oh, so she likes dedication.
Yeah.
Okay.
And she does have the sense to apologize for snapping at Jasnah, or at Shallan. But I will say, yeah, Shallan is not in part 2. Part 2 introduces another main character, and then we'll get back to Shallan later. There was something else I wanted to mention with Kaladin. Oh, nothing to end a part like a near suicide attempt.
Yeah, that's
heavy, huh?
Dark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that is a thing that people's biggest thing with the Stormlight Archive that they have trouble with is how heavy Kaladin's story is.
Yeah.
It's off-putting to a lot of people.
Because they don't want to dwell on those kinds of feelings.
Yes.
And people that get triggered easily themselves are not the type of people that should read this series.
No. I do think what I like about Kaladin is that like we see here, he's on that ledge, but he steps back from it, and he goes back and he learns Teft's name, and he learns all the Bridgemen's names, and he resolves to keep going. But speaking of introducing characters that I really love, I love Teft. Teft is such a great character, and we'll see more.
I guess I'll have to see.
You will. Yeah, the last thing. You know what? I don't think I really have anything else to bring up in this.
All right. Well,
we are done with part 1 out of 5. So we're making progress. We are on my book. We are 164 pages in out of 1,000. So that's actually making good progress for episode 4.
Yeah, that is. Yeah. That is.
At this pace, I think the first book will be around 30 episodes. So that's not too bad. Yeah. All right. Why don't you go ahead and plug where people can find you online?
Well, you can find me on Twitch at Mango Asteroid whenever I decide to go live again. I already didn't go live very often, but I'm probably not gonna go live often during the summer, for reasons. But hopefully in the fall, I will be much more active on Twitch. And yeah. What about you, Shawn?
You guys can follow me on Twitter at Shawn_AFK. Everything that I do is in my bio. You guys can follow this show on Twitter at SpeakStormlight. I think I got that right again. I probably messed it up like I did at the beginning. At SpeakStormlight. No, I got it right. At SpeakStormlight. We host this show on anchor.fm/speakthewords. We are on Apple Podcasts, I think. We might not be, but we're definitely on Google Podcasts. We're definitely on Pocket Cast, Spotify, and some other places as well, I think. Next week we'll do the interludes and looking at, the interludes are short, so we'll get through the interludes next week and then we'll start on part 2. But, just to tease you a little bit for the interludes, because at the beginning of every part and at the beginning of every interlude part, they have the names of the POVs that are in there. So the interludes have 3 POVs this time. The first one is Ishik, who you should not know, that his name has never been mentioned. The second one is Non-Balat, who Shallan has mentioned as being her brother. And the last interlude is Zeth.
Ooh.
And so we'll see about all that next week. Thank you guys so much for listening. See you guys next time.
I'm still laughing at the fact that you said Shawn instead of Shallan earlier.